Well, so I was starting to say that I like to experiment with materials. I like to investigate things, but you do start with intention that is not held to.
Right.
And that takes me off on all kinds of tangents, which
Sure.
I think in career-wise has been a drawback. But aesthetically and creatively, it's been wonderful.
Right.
Because I'm very free in my sense of creativity.
When did you first start incorporating video and media into your work?
Probably in the mid-2000s. Although back at UNT, getting my master's, I did experiment with video. That video was brand new.
Right.
And so we all were going, what can we do with this? So I had a sense of it. And I like video as an element that isn't a story. You know, I don't want the video to take time.
Right.
I want it to be the part of the action at the moment. So I don't usually use video in a way that you have to watch it as a video.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes part of the environment or part of the installation or the entire installation.
Right.
So in the mid-2000s, I began, I'm trying to think what exactly, I think my very first large video project was because I was thinking so much about how we are being watched all the time with surveillance. And I thought, is there a way to talk about what that feels like to be watched? So I began to solicit my friends to let me film their eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And now I call it a collection. You know,
Right.
I've got almost 200 sets of eyes. And the criteria was that whoever was being filmed they could see themselves in the viewfinder of the camera.
Right.
So they could keep their eyes centered in the viewfinder. But there could be no nostrils and no hairline.
Right.
And they were to look at the camera, the viewfinder, keep themselves there for 6 minutes and try not to blink.
Right.
Well, that's impossible. But if I didn't ask them to try not to blink, the blinking is unbelievable how much there is in someone's eyes when you film them.
Right.
So the effort not to just slowed it down.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so I collected these eyes and then mounted the first installation with 7-inch players, and every player was on a stand that emulated or referenced a body, you know, like a soldier.
Right.
Not really a soldier, but like a, you know, in sort of a regimented
Sure.
composition. So then you've got these eyes all looking at you. But what was extremely interesting about that, and I've used these eyes in other configurations since, and it's always, this fact always is true. The eyes are not threatening at all.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, it absolutely reverses itself. You're looking at them.
Mm-hmm.
And I did ask the people who were, you know, my friends and others who would allow me to film them, to ask them to look at the picture plane. So there is a point where their eyes are focusing, so it's not on infinity.
Right.
So that's one reason I think it's not penetrating as much as it might, but I'm not sure if it ever would.
Right.
Because that ability for you to look at all these people's eyes is empathetic.
Right.
So it doesn't threaten. It creates almost a human experience of being able to study someone's eyes.
Sure.
And all kinds of interesting things happen from filming people and using their eyes, in that sometimes they don't even know it's them when they can't recognize themselves when you extract an element from the face, and it's not in relation to the other elements. I've had people say, where am I? I don't see me in here.
That's funny.
Or I've had people say, well, those are my eyes. And I'd say, no, they're not. Another thing that's interesting is one woman I filmed, I never thought of her as very pretty at all. Mm-hmm. But when you took her eyes away from her face, they're amazingly beautiful eyes. And that all became super interesting to me.
Sure.
So anyway, that was the first one. And I continued to do that. I continued to film people and use them in different ways.
Right.
The eyes. And then I did it with horses' eyes. And
oh, wow.
And because as a girl that had to have a pony, I have a whole lot of relationship to animals, and especially to the horse's eye is phenomenal, and you can't help but look at it, and they look at you,
right,
and they study you. And I had a real hard time finding a horse that wasn't tired, though. I would go to these stables, and they were so tired they weren't relating to me in the way I wanted to see that eye relate. And finally I found a friend I found had a jumping horse, and so that horse was intense and looked at me exactly the way I wanted the horse to, and captured the eyes there. So video continued to be involved off and on in the future. I noticed one of my processes is not to move from A to B to C to D.
Sure.
I work more in a spiral.
Yeah.
Things I've worked with, I pick back up again and do it another way in another time. It's more maybe a corkscrew,
Yeah.
And so I'm not finished with anything.
Right.
It seems, It
reminds me of a conversation I had with Joseph Hobble, where he's like, every time someone tries to put me in a box, I rebel and I try something new. But that doesn't mean I'm never going to go back to it. It just means I want I want to move on to something else. But it's just one more arrow in your quiver. I imagine you just figure out how these things keep interacting in new ways and coming together, because there are certain things like foam figures, the draping, the video, that keep coming back up and reconfiguring in new ways.
Yeah, they do, and that's I think that's great. Of course, again, this art world, this art market would rather you didn't do that.
Right. Those are almost two things, different
really
things. Art world and art market.
Well, and it's up to the artist to decide where they are willing to land.
Right.
What do they want from it? And what I want is that experience between me and it, and letting it take me where it needs to go.
So maybe this is a good time to talk about public art. When did you first get into doing public art in the big commissions?
It's interesting you asking me that. I actually am going to have to really think about what the first one was. But again, in my experience, I had a lot of experience on the ground floor of public art. I have always done large temporary art.
Okay.
That would be the beginning. I built some very, very large pieces in New York over the years at various sculpture parks. And then Connemara here in Dallas, I was early on involved with that. It no longer exists, but it was a sculpture park out in Allen, Texas, that the Williams family and Amy Monnier ran for years, and gave artists all kinds of great chances to try things outdoors. I got a commission when I was exhibiting with D.W. Gallery back early in the 80s to build a life-size bird for a development, and I did it. The development never happened, but the bird did. So it wasn't life-size. It was it was huge. It was 20 feet tall, and so that was my first chance to really build something big that could be permanent.
Sure.
I mean, I've certainly built lots of things that might not be permanent. So it was made of steel, and I made the model. I know then the second one was, and I didn't get this commission, but I sure wanted it. It was a commission for the city of Lubbock, and I designed a guitar dock for their lake that you could walk out onto the guitar that was like 40 feet long, and and then pull your boat up to the neck of the guitar to reference all the music coming
Sure.
out of Lubbock. I had several chances to not get it and build models and figure them out and learn. And of course, having run the public art, I knew what was involved in what I needed to figure out, like how much is this going to cost, who's going to do this, how's this going to work, etc. So then I still can't remember. Well, when I worked with DART, I got to do the design of a few of the stations. So, of course, I had that experience. But again, the very first commission as a public artist, I'm not sure what it was. But over the years, when Tom and I teamed up, we've done a few together, and then I've done separate ones, and he's done separate ones. But our White Rock Lake piece was probably the one I think met what I would aspire to in public art, which was it had message, it was environmentally sound, it was about the environment, and it was educational, and it interacted with the viewer. Right. And I guess you probably know that it's since been removed because of lack of maintenance on it. So it was there for 10 plus years in White Rock Lake.
Right.
So we called it the Wildlife Water Theater, and it referenced the fact that the bathhouse had a theater, and in the water you could see another group of performers, and we researched who would perform at what times of year, and there, between birds and reptiles specifically, and made these. It came about in an interesting way. We went out to the lake to see what we should propose, and I said to Tom, because there were still poles in the water from the swimming that happened at White Rock Lake in front of the bathhouse, and I said to Tom, look how when a bird stands on a pole, it makes a sculpture. Actually, it's a pole with an object on top, and he said, what if we put 100 poles out there? And then that went into the idea that you could have all these birds, and then we floated discs in the water because that lake is full of turtles.
Right.
And I'll back up. I didn't even tell you this part. In the 80s, I had built a floating sculpture in that exact spot for a temporary project. Wow. And I had built a floating drawing right there, and with wood and so forth, and colors, and so I floated this drawing in the water, and it was covered with turtles immediately, and birds. And that gave me the idea that I knew those animals were there to interact with. So that's why we ended up doing it. So our Wildlife Water Theater had marquees on the land, and there were I guess you'd call them signs, but illustrations of what animals you could see perform, and gave you a little bit of their resume, like what they look like and what they did, and so forth and so on. In order to install that piece, and in order to maintain it ourselves, which we did for 5 years as part of our commission, we had to buy wetsuits, and we would go out into the water, the water, and clean the poles and clean the lights, because it had an LED light component, solar powered. And the turtles, and some of these are snapping turtles, would follow us in the water like a dog, staying a little far back, but just, you'd walk over here and the turtle would be